I never planned to stay in Norway forever. It was supposed to be a temporary escape, 6 months, maybe a year, to put distance between myself and the life I left behind. I didn't know a single person when I arrived in Oslo, which suited me just fine. The city was cold and detached, and so was I. I found a cheap, half-furnished apartment on the outskirts. It smelled like mildew and cigarettes, but it was quiet. I got a job at a small bookstore downtown, mostly working nights. It wasn't a glamorous life, but oh well, it was mine. I told myself that was enough. For a while, things were doing okay. My life settled into a routine. Wake up late, take the tram to work, read during slow hours, and walk home in the dark. Oslo felt safe in a way that cities back home never did. The streets were empty, but not threatening, silent, but not eerie. At least, that's how I felt. One night, I noticed a man. I would get this feeling of being watched as I walked home. I dismissed it. Paranoia, I said. Old habits from a life I was trying to forget, but that itching feeling didn't go away. Every night, the sensation grew stronger, a presence just beyond my periphery, footsteps that never quite matched mine but never fell too far behind. I started taking different routes home, stopping randomly to check if someone was following me, but I never saw anyone. That was when I met Coraline. She started coming into the bookstore on Thursdays, small, quiet, and pale, in a way that made her look almost translucent under the store's fluorescent lights. She never browsed, never lingered. She would walk straight to the counter, place a single book in front of me, pay in cash, and leave without a word. Hell, and she was right. The book was always the same. Jenta som forsvann, The Girl Who Disappeared. I didn't question it. People have their habits. Maybe she collected copies. Maybe she just liked the story. But then, on a particularly slow night, curiosity got the better of me. I grabbed a copy off the shelf and flipped through it. That was the first time I saw her name, scrawled in the margins of random pages, written in smudged, frantic handwriting. Coraline. I frowned. It didn't make sense. I checked another copy, more writing, more mentions of her name, some in English, some in Norwegian, some just a single word, help. That night, as I walked home, I knew without a doubt that someone was following me, but this time, when I turned around, I saw him, a figure standing at the far end of the street, just beyond the reach of the flickering streetlights, too far to make out his features, too still to be just another pedestrian. He didn't move, didn't shift, just stood there, watching. I told myself to keep walking. Don't run. Don't act scared. Suddenly my pulse hammered in my throat, and my feet betrayed me, quickening despite my best efforts. When I finally reached my building, I risked one last glance over my shoulder. The street was empty. I knew, at that moment, that this was only the beginning. I remember the town I grew up in as a quiet, peaceful place, secluded in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by dense woods that seemed to stretch on forever. There were maybe a few hundred people living there, but that's about it. Just a dot on the map, tucked away from the world, the kind of place where everyone knows your name, and the evenings are as quiet as the night itself. Growing up, I never questioned the silence. It was just how things were. We didn't have much to do other than the usual: school, hanging out with friends, and exploring the woods behind our house. I spent hours hiking the trails, wandering further than I probably should have. I guess, like most kids, I didn't realize how dangerous things could get. My best friend, Kyle, and I would often head into the woods on the weekends, especially when we were feeling adventurous. Our parents always warned us to stay on the main paths. Don't wander off too far. Stay close. Don't get lost. But, of course, we ignored them. The woods weren't scary, not really. They were just trees and dirt paths, occasional squirrels and birds. That's all we thought it was. But something was off, looking back. I can't say exactly when it started. It was one of those things you don't notice until it's too late. I think it was the first time we saw him. We didn't talk about it the rest of the way back, but I could feel the tension in the air, thick and heavy. And that night, as I lay in bed, I couldn't help but think about the figure again. I remember staring at the ceiling, wondering who he was and why he was out there in the woods. The silence of my room felt suffocating. The next few days passed uneventfully. Life went on, the days blending together in that kind of slow, rural way that makes everything seem like it's standing still. But then it happened again. We were out in the woods the following weekend, this time deeper than before. We had strayed far from the familiar paths, but it didn't feel wrong. I thought maybe we were just getting bolder, but as we kept walking, I couldn't shake that nagging feeling that we were being watched. I looked around, but everything was quiet. No one in sight. That's when I heard it. A rustling, like footsteps, somewhere off to the left. I froze. Kyle didn't seem to notice, but I could tell he felt something was off too. He was suddenly tense, walking a little faster, glancing over his shoulder every few seconds. I turned to look, but there was nothing there. Just trees, but I swear I heard something moving, following us. My heart began to race. Hey, Kyle, did you hear that? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He didn't answer at first, but I could see his eyes darting around. He had heard it too. Let's get out of here, he muttered. We started walking faster, the uneasy feeling growing with every step. But that's when I saw him again, the figure from the first time. He was standing in the same spot as before, but this time I could see him more clearly. He wasn't moving, just standing there, watching us. I don't know why I felt so scared. It wasn't like he had a gun or a knife or anything that would have made him dangerous. He was just there, in the woods, staring at us with this unnerving stillness. Do you see him? I asked Kyle, my voice shaking now. Kyle nodded, his face pale. Yeah, I see him. Let's go. Now. We turned and ran, not stopping until we were back at the edge of the woods. My heart was pounding in my chest, the fear eating at me. But when I looked back, the figure was gone, vanished. That night, I lay awake in bed, trying to make sense of it all. Who was he? Why was he there, in the woods, watching us? And why did he feel so wrong? Over the next few weeks, things only got worse. I kept hearing noises at night, scratching at my window, faint whispers just outside my room. I would get up to check, but no one was ever there. The worst part was that I couldn't tell anyone. I couldn't explain what was happening. How could I? Who would believe me? It wasn't just me. Kyle had been acting strange too. He wouldn't talk to me about it, but I could tell something was eating at him. One night, I caught him staring out his window, his face pale and his eyes wide, like he was waiting for something to happen. I tried to ignore it, but I couldn't. I had to know who the figure was, so I went back into the woods, alone.